4 months ago, I planted 12 fruit trees as the first step in creating this backyard orchard that will eventually give me year-round harvests of a wide variety of fruits, from peaches to nectarines to plums and figs and persimmons, and even some odd ones like this jujube here, which apparently is more than just some gummy candy that you find at the movie theater. And when I planted all these, I made a full detailed video showing that entire process, from soil prep to irrigation, planting, and that first dormant pruning when I planted them. And even though pruning was just a small section of that video, a lot of people told me that was the most helpful pruning demonstration that they've seen. So I'll add a link to that video at the end of this one so that you can see not only how I pruned these when they were dormant and when I planted them as year-old trees, but also everything else that I've done to get to where I am today. And that's my plan in the future, is to continue to make these videos so that you can see not only what I'm doing now, but what the results of all the cuts that I'm making and everything that I'm doing are, 6 months from now, a year from now, and well into the future. These videos, this series, will follow this backyard orchard from its inception all the way until maturity and well on into that. So if you want to follow along with this process, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We've all seen those videos, garden videos or what have you, where somebody does something and it looks great. You're like, okay, cool, but did it work? Did it die? It died, right? That's why you didn't make it that follow-up video. I won't do that to you. I mean, something might die, but I'll show you. I want to show you what happens as a result of all these cuts, because it's pretty amazing. And I know that pruning fruit trees can be really daunting, intimidating. It's kind of scary, especially for new gardeners, to make these big cuts. And so seeing that making these cuts isn't going to kill your tree, it's actually going to make them more healthy, is encouraging. So I'm going to show you what happens after I make all these cuts. And if you want to see, like all these trees, I cut these things all down to about 2 feet, and look at the size of them now. These things are massive. So without further ado, let's get to cutting. Pruning is a necessary step for all fruit trees, but it's most important in these first few years, because this is the time when we're determining and establishing the eventual size and shape of these trees. And a lot of people ask, when is it too late to prune? Or what if I have this large mature fruit tree and now I want to bring it back down to size? Can I still do that? And you can, and I'll cover that later in this video. But definitely the best way to do it, if it's still an option, is to start with a small tree and maintain it small. So I'll start with showing you this process, the proper way, if it's an option for you, and hopefully it is. So when I planted these back in early spring or late winter, I made some really low heading cuts at about 24 inches, way down here. And I did that to establish a low branch scaffold. Basically, the scaffold are where the first lateral branches come off this main trunk. And the goal there is to create a low scaffold that will create a low, small tree. Because as a backyard gardener, it's up to me how small I want this tree to be or how large I want the tree to be. For commercial growers, they're worried about getting equipment through there, and your tree tag from the nursery is going to tell you how large the tree might grow. But it's really up to us, and it's established and determined through these pruning cuts. So the first step is heading it off low. This is a Double Delight Nectarine. I just planted it. Right now it's about nose high. It's a 2-year-old tree. And so I want to make my initial pruning cuts on it to bring the scaffold way down to about knee high. So I'll come way down here. Now I'll make this cut at a slight angle just above that bud. All right, with the top gone, my next step is to tip prune each of these just beyond an outward facing bud. That's it for this winter pruning. This will grow out in summer, put on a lot of growth, and then we'll prune it again then. Now it's had some time to grow and really branch out and put on a lot of new growth. So today I'm just going to kind of check that vigor. I'll bring it back down to size, and I'll open up the center a little bit. And I'll start with this nectarine here. I'll show you each of those steps and how I'm working through that process with this nectarine. Then I'll take you around to some of the other trees to show you what I might be doing with different varieties, and also show you some different examples, because this is a pretty well-balanced tree. It's going to be a good example, but you're going to come into different things with your trees. They're all going to be growing a little bit differently, even though they're all kind of following the same general principles. Before I start making any cuts on this tree, the first step is deciding which shape and style I'm pruning it to, whether it's a young tree and I'm establishing that shape, or it's a more mature tree and I'm just maintaining that shape. There's three main shapes or styles for fruit trees. There's a center leader, commonly used for apple and pear, and that's where you'd have one main trunk and all the branches coming off that trunk, or a modified center leader, where you have a low scaffold, a main trunk, and then another upper scaffold. Or there's an open crown or open center tree, used mostly for stone fruits like peaches and plums and nectarines, mostly what I have here, and that's what I'm pruning these trees to. So that's where you would have basically headed off as I did when I planted these. Then you have outward scaffold branches and you have an open center. And as you can see, this one doesn't really have an open center anymore. So the first thing I'll need to do is kind of take out this center leader that's grown from this vigorous bud. But before I make any cuts at all, I also need to make sure that I've got sharp, clean pruners. So I put an ice edge on these and I wiped them down with isopropyl alcohol, which I actually recommend doing between each tree, not just before you start, but when you go from tree to tree, you don't want to spread that disease. So wipe them down nicely with that. And I know that videos of pruning when these trees are leafed out can be really hard to see where I'm cutting exactly and what I'm doing for these cuts. So before I start making all these cuts on this tree, I want to show you an example of the two main types of cuts that I'm doing and how I do them. So I'm just going to take a little bit off the top here and come in close. So the main two types of cuts that I'm doing are thinning cuts and heading cuts. A thinning cut is where I would go right next to the main trunk of the tree or branch, next to this collar here. So this is what's called the collar, right where the branch connects. And I'd go about 1/8 of an inch from that and take it all the way off. That's a thinning cut. Or a heading cut. A heading cut is where I go anywhere mid-branch and I make that cut at an outward facing bud. So this is my outward facing branch, outward facing bud right here. A heading cut is made 1/8 of an inch past that bud, and that will encourage this bud to create a new branch outward. So that's a heading cut, that's a thinning cut. Let's start cutting. Okay, so if you look close, you can see right here where I made my initial heading cut, and it's starting to heal over really nicely. But then just beyond it, you can see this new leader starting. So what happened was I cut just above this bud right here that I wanted to be one of my scaffold branches, but because it was a terminal bud, meaning it's the bud at the end of a branch, this got all of the energy, so it became very vigorous, and now it's basically becoming a new leader rather than a scaffold branch. All these are nice sized branches. This one is almost the exact same size as the main trunk, so it's way too vigorous. I need to take this off. My options are I could take it off right here where I made my initial cut, but that would only leave me with these two branches this way and one this way, and I wouldn't really have anything on that side. So if I come up a little bit further, I can see I've got branches here and here, and I actually have a nice one on the back side of this branch right here that's coming out in the exact direction I want it. I initially wanted it a little bit lower, but this is still only about 10 inches above where I initially had it. So what I'm gonna do is, rather than take out this vigorous leader way down here, I'll take it out just above this other branch, and I'll cut it about 1/8 of an inch above that. Gone. And so now this is my new scaffold branch going out this way. So that's all the vigorous growth that was growing in here. Another reason that was okay is because this is on the northeast side of my tree. So the southwest side that gets the most light coming in is really open now. So these branches down here where it gets the most light, they're gonna fill in pretty quickly, and that's where I want my light coming in anyway. If this was really vigorous on this side, it might not make that same decision. Okay, vigorous one's out. Now I need to thin out this scaffold a little bit so it's not too crowded, and take out any crossing branches that might rub later. So all these branches in here, these are growing in toward the center. Clean up any of these. Open up the middle here. This one's growing up toward the center. Now the final step to pruning this tree is to bring the entire tree down with some heading cuts. And that's something that I do with all of my trees, whether it's a 1-year-old tree or a 21-year-old tree. I'm making heading cuts to bring the size down in summer. Summer pruning is for size management and size maintenance. And on young trees like this, I'm also creating some structure and some shape, but always maintaining the size in summer. So you can take it down really as much as you want for a young tree like this. Either 1/3 or a half is normally a good idea for a young tree if you want to keep it small, but kind of depends on how much growth you get also. So I'm going to be taking this down about half on these. I'll probably cut it right around my belly button since my first cut was right around my knee. And what I'm looking for is an outward facing bud on these scaffold branches. So I look at the branch, I can see all these buds in different directions. If I have a bud that's on the inside of the branch and I cut above that, that's going to encourage a new branch from that terminal bud to go inward or upward. But I want it to go outward, so I'll look on this branch, I'll find an outward bud, or on this branch you can see there's actually another little branch that's facing outward nicely, and that's the height that I want. So I can make a cut right above that outward branch, and that will become my new branch. Nice direction, and I'll just keep going around. This branch right here, I want it about that same height. Got an outward branch and bud right there. Good there. This is the, remember this was the vigorous shoot that I had in the center, and this is the terminal bud. So I know a lot of the energy is going to this. So one thing I can do to check that energy so it doesn't become another leader again is rather than trim it at the height of all the rest of these, I can bring it back down quite a bit further, take it all the way down to there, really keep it in check and take some of that energy out of it. Keep coming around. I'll trim all of these similar heights as the other ones. Outward buds or outward branches. These are actually a little bit high. Let's go there. This one. There above that branch. And we'll give this one another cut, an outward bud right there. All right, that looks pretty good. Next tree in line here is my Flavor Delight Aprium. It's an apricot plum cross, kind of like a pluot, but a pluot has more plum characteristics and some apricot. This has more apricot characteristics and a little bit of plum. Just like the Nectarine I just pruned, it's grown a lot. I pruned it at 24 inches, way down here when I planted it, and the buds have just put on tons of growth. There's like probably 8 feet of growth up here, and I should have checked the growth in spring. That's another thing you can do if you live in an area like I do in California where these things just grow like crazy. I could have pruned it a couple of months ago, but I waited. I pruned a little bit late. I'm pruning a little bit late now. Totally going to be fine, but I'm just going to be cutting off more than half of this. I'm probably going to be cutting off like 2/3 of the growth on this tree so I can bring it back down to size. So one different example on this tree from the previous one, this one has a very flat, almost downward facing branch right here. And so I want to get rid of this because although it would eventually produce fruit, once there's fruit on there, it's going to bend down and it's going to be way too low of an angle, eventually snap. What I'm looking for are these nice 45-degree angles. Nothing too steep, nothing too shallow. If I'm limited on the amount of scaffold branches that I have left, I can adjust their angles by either hanging a weight on them, propping them up, pulling them together. But ideally, there's enough scaffold branches here where I just kind of get to select the best 3 to 5 branches and remove anything that's either too flat like this or too steep. So this one I'll take and I'll do another thinning cut right here at the collar and just remove that completely. Now this one has a lot of scaffold branches in here clustered together, some of them crossing, and there's just way too many cluttering each other. So the next thing I want to do, because there aren't really any parts of this that are too vigorous, it's just too overcrowded. So I want to come in here and I want to choose the best 3 to 5 scaffold branches and get rid of anything that's crowding or crossing. As you can see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 scaffold branches, way too crowded, and these 2 are even crossing. So that is a problem. First thing I'll do is I'll remove these crossing branches, cut them right at the collar. right there. Now I'm left with 6. I want no more than 5. This one right here is pretty steep and it's right between these two. So I'll cut this one as well, right? There. Now I'm left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They all have nice spacing and that looks pretty good. Now I've thinned out my scaffold branches, but there's a couple more branches kind of growing into the center here. So I'll clean these branches up a little bit. And now I'm just left with nice outward facing scaffold branches, and just like the other one, the last thing to do is head them all off at outward facing buds, just about navel height for me. So I'm not going to take them down by half. It's going to be at least 2/3 of the way down because these things are way up there. So this one, take this to that outward branch right there. Nice bud here. Branch there. This one's gonna cross. All right, one more down. Next in line is this persimmon tree. This is a Fuyu persimmon, and persimmon trees don't need to be pruned, but keep in mind they grow really large if they're allowed to. So if it's in a backyard setting and you want to maintain it small like I do with all of these with 6-foot spacing, it needs to be pruned to keep it small. So you can prune it to a center leader, a modified center leader, or an open crown. I'm pruning all of these to open crown because I just kind of want to see what they do like that. So this one hasn't put on a lot of growth, which really makes my job pretty easy. There's a couple of branches here that are going a little bit toward the center, not as much outward. So I'll start by just removing these. Just these branches that are growing in toward the center. Now I'm left with 3 outward scaffold branches. I could just leave these as they are because there's not a lot of vigor to check. But what I'll do to keep kind of maintaining this shape is this one's already nice and flat and it's got a couple buds here, so it's going to branch well. This one's getting a little bit vertical, so I'll take it to another outward bud way out here at the tip, and I'll do the same with this one, just heading this off at an outward bud there and just kind of roughly maintaining this shape. So real simple with this Fuyu persimmon. Okay, let's switch it up and prune a tree that's a little bit more complicated. Most of these trees look really healthy. They've got tons of vigorous growth on them, and there's a lot to remove, a lot of branches to choose from, compared to this one. This tree, little peach tree, just looks very sad, and it has since it broke dormancy. So I don't know if it has a disease that it had from the nursery. I haven't really put in time to determine what's going on with it, but it's had kind of yellow leaves and has not put on much growth at all. It has nice green leaves at the tip. They're sort of curling up, not like peach leaf curl. It's a different type of curl. But anyway, it does not have the branching like I hoped it would when I planted it. I top pruned it at 24 inches like all the other ones, and it actually died back the first about 4 inches. So instead of having the 3 to 5 outward facing buds to create those scaffold branches, the top died back, and I only ended up with 2 scaffold branches here. So I've got one going this way and one going this way, and a tree, unless it's an espalier, needs more balanced branching than just these 2 branches. But I want to show you how you can correct that if you still have a healthy tree that only has those 2 outward branches, or if you want to try to revive this one, which I'll try for now, and then we'll see. So I'll bring it in close to show you what I'm cutting in here. Initially, this center leader went up and there were branches here and here, but this died back to here and I'm left with these 2 branches. So in order to make 4 branches, I'm looking for this little branch here and this one here, and I'll trim off the rest of this. And then on this side, I've got a branch here and a branch here, so I'll trim off the rest of this. Okay, yes, this tree is still looks very sad. But there's time left in the summer to see if it's going to revitalize and grow these nice branches out, or if it's just going to kind of shrivel up and die. I don't have a lot of faith in it because I planted it dormant and it's looked sad the whole time. I think it probably has a disease. The best thing to do is probably just take this thing out this winter and replant it. But I've got a few more months to see if it turns the corner. Otherwise, we'll start fresh. Let's move on to the next tree. Now for another unbalanced tree that presents more challenges, but at least this one is not unhealthy and unbalanced. It's very healthy. It's got tons of growth. It's just not balanced growth. And this is that Jujube I was talking about. Another one that I headed off way down here. This thing has put on a ton of growth, and from your angle it probably looks like it's pretty well balanced, but there's no branching on this side. It's got two nice big branches here. If there was a third one here, I would be so happy. Unfortunately, there is a third one. It's down here. It's a little bit low. It's not quite the right angle. So it's put a ton of vigor this direction. It might be due to the fact that I've got a hedgerow of tomatoes right here, which is only a temporary hedgerow. But I think it is probably due to the to an idea that I have that Jujube are not really designed to be like an open crown tree. I think they're more for a center leader or a modified center leader. But I'm experimenting here to see if I can do an open crown thing with it. And based on the fact that it had so much vigorous growth this year, I'm not worried about bringing it back down to size and trying to push out some branches on this side. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I need to bring these branches down. If I let them go, all of this energy is going to go this way and it might never balance out here. So I need to help it balance out. I'm going to bring this way back. I'm not taking off a half or 2/3. I'm taking off like 3/4 of this down to right there. Whew. These things have thorns also, by the way. And then I'll take this one way back to right there. Look at that. We got a tiny little tree again. And hopefully it branches out this way. I think it's going to. Otherwise, we're going to keep pushing it. I'm going to make this thing a center leader Jujube, whether it wants to or not. Unfortunately, it cut off most of the fruit, which is fine. I haven't really talked about fruit thinning, but I don't want any fruit in the first few years. A little Jujube fruit, one of these on here, or looks like two. It's not going to take a ton of energy, so I'll leave them. All right, let's do like one more tree, and then I'm going to go over some frequently asked questions about pruning, specifically summer pruning. Before I get to the last tree that I'm pruning today, I want to stop here at this fig tree. This is a Panache Fig, and I actually propagated this fig from a cutting of a different fig tree at my previous urban farmstead, and I planted it this spring. It was about 8 inches tall. I topped it right there, and it's put on 3 really nice, well-balanced scaffold branches. It's grown very vigorously, pretty much up to shoulder height right now, and I could prune it right now if I wanted to, but I almost never prune my fig trees in summertime. I like to wait till winter, and the main reason is that I like to propagate more figs from hardwood cuttings. So if I wanted to, I could prune this right now. I would just cut it at some outward facing buds and bring it down to about, about halfway. But I'll wait till winter. I'll probably prune it right about here in wintertime after these leaves come off, and I'll propagate more cuttings from it. But fig trees are super forgiving with pruning. You could cut this thing all the way down to the ground. It's going to grow back, and it produces figs on first year wood. So you can prune them any shape, any size you like. This one, I just want to keep it small in this row of trees. This is my apple tree. Apple trees are most commonly pruned to either a center leader or a modified center leader. So when I went and hacked it off at 24 inches to create all this outward branching, that was not really a common thing to do. But as you can see, it still looks really healthy, and it actually kind of looks like it would be really good for an espalier tree, which would be pretty cool. But that's not my plan for it here. Really, I just want it to go along with all of the other trees in this row, and they're all pruned to open centers, so I was going to do that. But as you can see, compared to the other trees that I've pruned so far, even though it's branching a lot like them, all of the branches come out and they go straight up. And that's a characteristic of apples and pears, and that's one of the reasons they're not commonly pruned to an open center, because their branches want to go up rather than out. So that's normally why they're pruned to either a center leader or a modified center leader. So today, I'm going to prune this thing to a modified center leader. I'll leave a few of these lower branches to be its lower scaffold. I'll choose a center branch for its center leader, that I'll top for an upper scaffold, and then we'll just kind of clean up the rest. So as I come in here, I'm really just looking for branches that are coming out in different directions and thinning anything that's in the center. Okay, so now I have my outward branches, which are all of these ones, and my center leader, which is this one. So first, I'll tip all of my outward facing branches to outward facing buds, and that will produce an outward facing branch. Now, with my center leader, I want to top it at a good height for my next scaffold, somewhere around shoulder height here. Then I'll just remove this wonky branch. And that's it. The most frequent question I get about pruning fruit trees has to do with timing, and it's usually people who want to know, when is it too late to do this type of pruning? Either you're watching this in summer and you're wondering if you can just wait and do all this pruning in winter, or you're watching this in winter and your trees have already gone dormant and you're wondering, okay, I missed my summer pruning window. Should I go ahead and do this pruning now, or should I wait until next summer? If it's summer still, do not wait. But if it's wintertime and you missed that summer pruning window, I would say go ahead and prune it now. It's better late than never. But the reason you don't want to wait, if it's an option for you, is because as these deciduous fruit trees transition from summer to winter, in fall, they transition all of this food energy, all these leaves, as energy into their root system. So if I don't prune this, all of this goes into the roots. Then it's stored in the root system. Then in wintertime, when this is dormant, I'd come in and I cut this down by half. I have a disproportional amount of energy stored in those roots. So come springtime, when this tree hits bud break and it warms up, I'm gonna get all of that energy rushing back. It's gonna create a huge flush of growth up here, super vigorous, and I'm gonna get all this vegetative growth that I don't want for my fruit tree. So that's why you definitely wanna make those cuts in summertime to bring the size down if you can. So this O. Henry peach has maintained a pretty well balanced shape, has a couple of branches that are a little bit more vigorous, but they're still at a good angle, they're still good scaffold branches. So all I'm gonna do is take out some of this center growth, kind of clean up the center, keep it nice and open for sunlight, and then I'll come around and I'll tip all of these branches at outward facing buds. All right, looks pretty good. This is an Asian pear, and although I topped it at 24 inches at the same time as I did all of the other ones, it's doing a couple of things that the other ones are not doing. For one thing, it's growing very vertical rather than kind of branching out, and that's a characteristic of pear trees and apple trees. So I let this thing grow a little bit too long. Ideally, while it was growing so vertical, I should have checked its growth in spring to prune to these outward buds to really push it outward, but that's okay. I can still do that right now. So I'll look for these outward buds. I'll cut right above them, and I'm gonna push some branches outward on this thing, even though it doesn't want to. It's gonna work out, it's gonna go outward. The other thing I'm noticing on this that you might see are these sprouts coming in way down here. If you look closely, you can see this little dog leg right here. This is the graft union. So this is the scion, this is the variety that I want, this is the rootstock. So these sprouts are actually coming from the rootstock, and these are called suckers. These should be removed anytime you see them. It doesn't matter if it's spring, summer, winter, or fall. They're gonna be most common on apple trees, pear trees, and very common on citrus. If you see any sprouts coming at the base of a tree below that graft union, take them off right away. Look at the size of this Spice Z Nectaplum. This thing is enormous. It's almost 11 feet tall, and I pruned it down to 24 inches when I planted all the rest of these. So it's grown 9 feet almost in the last 4 months. Just insane. And that brings me to a question that I get a lot about rootstock. People want to know, should I buy a tree that's on a dwarf rootstock or a semi-dwarf rootstock so that it will stay small? And my advice would be, if you find the variety that you like on that rootstock, go ahead and buy it. But don't wait or settle for a different variety just because you want that dwarf rootstock or the semi-dwarf rootstock. Because all that means is that it's a less vigorous rootstock, which will create a less vigorous canopy. You'll still have to prune it, you just prune it less. So either way, you're gonna have to prune it. So find the variety that you want on the rootstock that it comes on. If it's dwarf or semi-dwarf, that's great. It's gonna need a little bit less pruning. They're all gonna need pruning. Just find the tree that you want and prune it down, just like I have to do with this massive Spice Z Nectaplum. The other ones I took down by about half. I'll probably take this thing down by almost 3/4 because it is so vigorous. Wow. So I'll start by removing any of these center branches. Now with the canopy opened up, I want to prune to outward facing buds. Well, that's it for this first summer pruning. Kind of looks like a slaughterhouse out here with all these giant limbs down. It probably looked like quite the massacre as I was lopping off so many large branches from these trees. I know it's a very intimidating thing, especially beginning as a gardener, to do this kind of massive pruning like this, but it's necessary, it's helpful. The trees will love you for it, and they'll produce a lot of fruit many years to come, and they'll be maintained small so that you can grow them close together. But don't take my word for it. Subscribe and you can see all of the other upcoming videos, because I will be following the full life cycle of this orchard, just like 4 months ago when I posted the initial video from planning and planting and soil prep and irrigation and pruning all these down to 24 inches, and y'all thought I was crazy then for lopping off so much, and here I am again, lopping them way back down again. I know it's kind of hard to see the details of the pruning this time of year when they're all full of leaves, and that's probably why you don't find a lot of videos online showing summer pruning, because it's hard to see those details. So if you have any questions about things that weren't really clear in this video, be sure to ask them in the comments below. If you want to follow along and see what this orchard looks like 1 year and 5 years from now, and see everything that I do for it, and of course, those harvests that we all can't wait for, be sure to subscribe. I'm also going to be making a lot more upcoming videos for my new urban farmstead. I'm building 8 raised beds back here and all kinds of stuff. So subscribe if you want to see those. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you have any questions at all about my garden or any questions about your garden, ask them in the comments below. Happy gardening, everyone.